Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. I'm joined by Ryan today. We're here to chat through another day of news and events at Celtic and what's ahead and what's been and how worried we should be at the moment. There's been a lot of trepidation at the moment, Ryan. We're building up to some massive fixtures here, and really we're looking for Celtic to show the response that they need to. I'm going to get your thoughts on that in a moment. First, a word from our sponsors. It's Simply Furniture, located in Hillington, Glasgow. It's Simply Furniture are an independent brand dedicated to bringing luxury and contemporary style into homes across the UK. The dedicated team ensures your furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. From elegant sofas to statement dining sets, their handpicked collections offer exceptional value without compromising on style. And if you want to see the range up close, you can visit their showroom in Hillington, Glasgow. And if you mention the Celtic Way, you will get a special in-store discount. Ryan, what's the mood today? I know you've been reflecting on a fair amount this week. We're getting into this stage now. We're expecting to hear from Brendan Rodgers later on. There's been a lot of scrutiny around Brendan Rodgers this season, but I would argue it's been more about his relationship with the board, his relationship with the recruitment. I don't think Brendan Rodgers has really been under the spotlight like he has this week, in the wake of the Dens Park match and in the wake of his post-match press conference at Dens Park. The glare is very much on Brendan Rodgers and his players at the moment. Rightly so. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be like that, but I'm interested to see how he handles this later on this afternoon when he again faces the media in another press conference.
Yeah, the gauntlet has pretty much been thrown down from the outside forces looking into Brendan Rodgers, and he's got to respond. He and his team have got to respond this week. The pressure, as you quite rightly said, is all on them now. As much as the protests, and I think there has been some pressure on him throughout the season. Now it seems pretty unified after the way that Celtic played at the weekend and the way that Brendan Rodgers spoke to the media as well. That is very much where the focus is at the moment. Yes, there's still annoyances with the board and grievances with the board, but I think now that has crept into how the manager's doing, how the manager isn't getting a tune out of the players that he's got at his disposal so far. Everybody knows that the squad is depleted, but at the same time, as I said yesterday on the show with Tony, he gets paid a lot of money to get results for Celtic, and at the moment the results aren't happening at a consistent enough basis, so that's the reason why that pressure is there.
And specifically the fact that he's not really made any significant changes to his setup or his lineups in any meaningful way. On a consistent basis, he's gone back to the well on a number of players who aren't quite getting the job done. That's well documented at this point. So I think I'm not sure what his demeanour will be like today. I'm not sure if he's going to hit back at the critics and do that kind of part today, Ryan. I'm not sure whether he's going to be humble and kind of say, look, this is on me, and try and just get through it with fairly basic football. I'm not sure if he's going to indicate that changes are coming to his team. Now, the problem with the Europa League game is that in terms of the wider squad and some of the players that we've been speaking about in recent days, obviously Shin Yamada cannot feature against Sturm Graz because he's not on the European squad. There's a few others in that boat as well. So it's not as if we're going to see a radically different lineup to Dens Park, but changes have to be made because again, you're looking at this weekend. You're looking at the Tynecastle game, which we know is going to be a very physical, aggressive, adrenaline-pumping match for Celtic in the midst of Tynecastle. I'm sure Brendan Rodgers will have one eye on that, and suddenly you're thinking about, well, what is he going to do to this team to get a tune out of them against the team who are the top of the Austrian Bundesliga?
Yeah, and I was speaking to somebody yesterday. The video will be coming out later on, either today or tomorrow, on what to expect from Sturm Graz. But they seem like a very confident side. They obviously beat Rangers last time out in the Europa League after being defeated by Midtjylland on match day 1. But they're a team that will certainly provide a stern test to Celtic, even at Celtic Park, and they'll be up for this game. They've got talent all over the pitch, young talent mixed with it's a blend of young talent mixed with older players as well. So there's a nice balance in the team. But for Celtic, I think there's just got to be changes, but I can't really pinpoint where the changes need to be because he could quite easily change the whole team after Sunday, unfortunately. But I just feel the team has grown a little bit stale, despite Brendan Rodgers making changes here and there throughout the season. There isn't enough changes, and there clearly isn't enough. There isn't enough improvement when those one or two changes are made. So maybe it opens up the case for wholesale changes on Thursday night. Either way, I think for me the problem area is in midfield. I know that attack and defence have been getting a lot of scrutiny, but the bedrock of a team, the reason a team does well, the reason that teams in Europe do well, is because they've got strong midfields that can break the lines and can get possession back and can be dominant in possession. And at the moment, Celtic's midfield is just not dominant whatsoever. So that would be the area. If I was to pinpoint one area that Celtic need to make changes on Thursday, then it's got to be in midfield for me.
Yeah, I think most people agree with that. I guess my problem is that I feel like the fans have been consistently calling for that throughout the season, and consistently he's gone with McGregor in that holding role, an apparent holding role, which I think domestically doesn't really serve much purpose because the majority of the possession comes through the centre backs anyway, and McGregor seems to be filling a space in the team that doesn't really need anyone there, and for a so-called creator in the team, I just don't think he's doing enough in that regard. In Europe, I think he looks isolated in that position. It's a different reason why it doesn't really function at a higher level. It's not really he's not a connecting force again between the defence and players further forward, but at the same time he can be isolated and exposed defensively as well. So it's a massive thing. That the Callum McGregor issue is massive, and again this has been signposted for ages. It's not necessarily about Callum McGregor. I think there's a space in this team for Callum McGregor. I think that's undoubted, but it's how to best utilise him. And the way he's currently playing and his current profile and the way he's getting about with the pitch, I just don't think is suitable for this deep holding midfielder, creative midfielder that isn't really offering anything. You know, and he's kind of just shuffling about the pitch and picking up the ball from the defence, where arguably Celtic should have better, more competent ball-playing defenders in that position to better connect the play, because Celtic centre-backs dominate possession in domestic matches, often in European matches too, to be honest, but then it's about, well, what is he offering from a defensive sense in Europe? And I just don't see it with Callum McGregor at the moment.
No, I agree, and I think that he can be caught out domestically as well against some of the better sides in the Scottish Premiership. For me, and I did mention it yesterday as well, but it's something that I've been talking about for years. I think the defensive midfield role, the number 6 role, whatever you want to call it, has been an area that's been neglected by Celtic, just simply due to the fact that Callum McGregor plays there, the captain plays there, and there's not really a point in having another one. Tomoki Iwata came in, he hardly got any game time, was in and out of the squad in some seasons, but he went to pastures now. You can even talk about Oliver Abildgaard that came in and didn't get any game time despite being a holding midfielder. We didn't see anything of him.
I was never convinced by him though. He didn't seem to have the mobility required in that position either.
That is very true, especially in an Ange Postecoglou side. You've got to remember it was Ange Postecoglou that signed him.
And listen, McGregor functioned well in Ange's team, I felt. I think there were some of the deficiencies that we're seeing now more consistently in terms of the transition in Europe and players counter-attacking against Celtic. I think those deficiencies have always been in this Celtic team, even when Ange was here. But I think at that point, I think McGregor had a mobility and a more of an attacking ambition and ability to get up the pitch more effectively for Celtic and be that kind of more deep-lying creator that you're wanting from that role and domestically. But as I say, I don't know whether it's time, I don't know whether it's regression in McGregor. It's just what his role demands of him now, he isn't able to produce at the moment, right? And it's been that way for a few months now, arguably going back into the tail end of last season. At some point, Brendan Rodgers has to acknowledge that. And my worry is that Brendan Rodgers isn't acknowledging that for whatever reason. Maybe he doesn't see it. Maybe he thinks we're all talking nonsense. Maybe he thinks we're totally off base and that Callum McGregor has given so much to Celtic and he's going to continue to produce for Celtic, or at least continue to be selected. My argument, a lot of things at Celtic right now is I feel like a lot of players are being picked on what they've done for Celtic in the past rather than what they're doing at Celtic currently. And I would put a few other players in that category too. I would put Ray Otati in that category. I'd put Cameron Carter-Vickers in that category. To an extent, I would put Kieran Tierney in that category at the moment, unfortunately. And these are the so-called leaders in this team and the spine of the team, and it's just not offering what Celtic needed to. And that's really the problem. We can talk about the players around the fringes, options coming into the team, being substituted in, players that we've not seen much of. We can talk about that all day, but unless Brendan Rodgers starts to get something more out of his established core, then Celtic are not going to be going anywhere far anytime soon.
See what I would say? I would say that, we're talking about making changes and making wholesale changes. I think that if Celtic could maybe change some of the core players, maybe even for a game or two, just to see how it goes. Let's see if that makes a difference, because I feel like the core of the team, and I would put Cameron Carter-Vickers, who has not had a great start to the season. He has fallen well below his high best. We expect normally a 7, 8 out of 10, but there's more 5s and 6s now than 7s or 8s, which is a real problem because you can usually depend on him. I don't know who you would bring in his place. Would that be Dane Murray? Would it be Austin Trusty if he came back from injury? That's very much up in the air. Kieran Tierney would agree with that, even though he's a player that's just came back to the club. I have real concerns over his long-term impact at Celtic, just given the way that I've watched him. I'm unsure where his ceiling is at the moment. I've spoken about this with a couple of people. I don't know where his ceiling is in terms of the quality of his game and whether that's going to be beneficial for Celtic in the long run. And then Callum McGregor, we had a piece up last year, or a couple of years ago. I think it was last year, but it might have been a couple of years ago, where Alan Morrison was talking about a slight regression in his game. Ever so slight, but definitely one that was notable. So Father Time catches up with everybody in all walks of life, and at 32 years old, you would expect him to slow down at some point. Whether that is the case remains to be seen over a longer period of time, but just the performances aren't matching up with the performances he had 3-4 years ago, and that's a problem because he's instrumental. He has been instrumental to Celtic's success over the past 8-9 years. So when that downgrade or that regression happens on the pitch, the club feels it and the team feels it as a result.
Yeah, everyone send in your comments and questions today. I'd be happy to hear from the live chat today. I'm seeing some comments about comments being deleted. We're not deleting any comments, by the way, so we're not doing that. If that's happening, it might be a YouTube glitch of some sort. That's certainly not our end. Yeah, let us know what you're thinking. What do you want to see from this team? Do you have any questions for us and the future direction of Celtic and how we feel about Brendan Rodgers? I think Brendan Rodgers will not deliver much in terms of his press conference today. I'm not expecting too much from him. It does kick off at 3 o'clock, and then we'll have all the news coming out of that. The way the UEFA press conferences work is they have the manager, but they also have a player at the same time, so it's like a dual press conference type thing. I don't know, my experience of UEFA press conferences, Ryan, is that they're a little bit more muted in terms of newsworthy stuff coming out of them. I think it's the way that UEFA set them up. They're a little bit more stilted. I don't know if that will be the case today and people will be getting fired in, but there seems to always be a little bit more distance and a little bit more of the stock answer coming out in these ones rather than the ones that you get at Lennoxtown, etc.
Yeah, I mean the one that I did go to, and that was down at Aston Villa before the Aston Villa Celtic game in the Champions League. He effectively announced that Kieran Tierney was coming back to the club, so that was more of a newsworthy event. But I do agree with you, and the ones that I've watched certainly on YouTube when they come around, or when they come around on the UEFA website or whatever, they are more muted affairs. They are more talking about what's happening at the game, because Europa League, Champions League, European game, it's a big event, and that seems to be the main focus. And I think there's also a nod to the fact that there may be foreign journalists in the ground at Celtic Park. They'll be going to the Sturm Graz one later on, but they might want to ask a question to Brendan Rodgers, so there might be a mutual understanding to focus or mostly focus on the game at hand. Although today I would expect there to be questions pointed towards Brendan Rodgers. I think it's one of those ones where if there is pressing issues, then they will get spoke about, but on the whole there'll be more of a focus on the European game, just due to who's present at the press conference. But I think it's one of those cards subject to change sort of moments in terms of the press conferences.
Des Harkin asking, does Sinisalo go between the sticks? I mean, this is a question that people are validly talking about at the moment and debating. Listen, my personal view on this is I'm never in too much of a rush to change goalkeepers, because I think instability can come when you do that. With that said, that only really applies when you don't have much confidence in any of the backup options. And actually, I do have confidence in Sinisalo. And when Sinisalo has come in and he has performed at a level, a very high level, certainly in towards the end of last season. And so I do want to see more of Sinisalo. I wouldn't be distraught at Schmeichel coming out of the team at the moment. I think there are some certain warning signs that maybe he's not quite hitting the heights that he did last season, which I thought he was impressive last season. He was impressive in Europe last season, but I think so far this season he's not been particularly impressive. It's not something you would say Schmeichel's been a standout for Celtic, and I think he was last season. Again, that's another situation where he's obviously he's getting picked on what he's achieved for Celtic last year, but if it's not quite working out in the moment, then you have to consider switching things up from time to time. And I think Sinisalo, because he's already been in the team and had a spell, I don't think there's much risk in putting Sinisalo in the lineup. Do I think Brendan Rodgers will do it? That's another question. I don't think he will. I don't think Schmeichel's coming out of this team anytime soon. And I'd be very surprised if Brendan Rodgers switches goalkeepers unless Schmeichel makes another catalogue of errors, Ryan. I just don't think Brendan Rodgers is going to do it because we know how he's wired and we know the way he picks the team. And if he does pick Sinisalo tomorrow night, for example, I would be pleasantly surprised, I think. But again, it would be a surprise.
It would be a surprise, and just due to the fact that Brendan Rodgers has worked with Kasper Schmeichel before, he's got that working relationship and probably a personal relationship with the veteran goalkeeper. I don't think he'll be quick in taking, you know, a veteran of the game and a guy that he definitely likes and wanted to bring in last summer out of the team so quickly. I just don't see that happening. But it's another one that goes back to that core that I'm talking about, and Kasper Schmeichel is certainly one of the core, and he's struggling this season as well. So you add that to Cameron Carter-Vickers, to Callum McGregor, to Kieran Tierney to an extent. Rio Hatate was part of the core too, and he's struggling in this Celtic team. When you've got a lot of these players, 4 or 5, 6 players struggling in the one team for form, then evidently that's going to impact the other players in the team. It's going to impact the results as a result of that. And the new players that are coming in are automatically getting relied upon to make things happen. And there's a lot of pressure on new players that are just in the door, a month and a half. Sebastian Tenetke, Kelechi Iheanacho. You know, the jury is still out on these players, but at the same time, there's so much pressure on them to deliver because other players aren't delivering at the moment. So it's an unfortunate situation to be in, but at the same time, unfortunately for Celtic, they've got to get themselves out of this rut.
If you want to know more about the Kasper Schmeichel situation, we've got an article up on the celticway.co.uk right now from Alan Morrison of the Huddle Breakdown, etc. He does a weekly thing for us, and he's looking at some of the underlying data with regard to Kasper Schmeichel and how that compares to last year. And frankly, it does match up with kind of the perception of what people are seeing. Sometimes when you look at this underlying data and you look at the numbers, sometimes it doesn't quite marry with the perception of the majority, but there is a notable sign of decline, I think, in Kasper Schmeichel, and whether he turns that round and manages to find something extra, again, you can't rule it out because he's building towards a World Cup. He's wanting to do his best, but again, I'm just seeing this as another symbol of Celtic hitting this wall at the moment. The Schmeichel situation, the McGregor situation. Again, Carter-Vickers, he's not doing it for me this season, unfortunately.
No.
Again, he's another one who's been so reliable and so consistent for Celtic, and the fact that he's not performing at his best is a serious concern for me. It makes me feel like something deeper is going on with the squad. Quinny asking, Donovan, Ralston, Johnston, who plays tomorrow against Sturm Graz? Well, it's not going to be Anthony Ralston for me, Quinny, I have to say. As I say, we're just slating everyone today. And it's not about these players as individuals or what they've done for Celtic. I think Ralston's been a pretty decent squad player over the years and has filled in and filled in holes when he is needed to. But we know what Ralston's all about, and we know what he can do in a Celtic shirt, and we know what he can't do in a Celtic shirt. And I just feel like Celtic are needing a different way forward in this position if Alistair Johnston is not available. Colby Donovan, of course, is on the Celtic B list, so he can feature tomorrow night if called upon. He's featured in the Europa League already this season. I don't think he's going to turn to Colby Donovan, so then the question becomes, is Alistair Johnston ready for this one? You know, he's been in training for a week and a half now. You don't want to mess about with hamstring injuries. I think coming in cold and starting a match is a big ask for Alistair Johnston. And so then the concern, again, is what does Brendan Rodgers do in this right flank? Celtic's right flank was horrendous and has been horrendous for a wee while. It's been a real weak point of the team. And I'm seriously worried if Celtic go into this match with Anthony Ralston and Hyun Jun Yang, then, you know, it's game over as far as I'm concerned, Ryan.
Yeah, for me, if he's fit and he's ready to go, then you throw Alistair Johnson, and Celtic are in need of results. And in order to get results, they need their best players on the park. And I know that he's just coming back from injury, but he's been in training for a week and a half. I would want every medical checked just so that he's ready to go back onto the field of play. But if that is the case and he is ready to go, he's got to be playing on Sunday against Hearts. If there's one player that I want in that team against Hearts at Tynecastle, because it's going to be a hostile atmosphere, they are going to be up for the game. I want Alistair Johnson to be ready for that. So even if it's 60 minutes and then bring Colby Donovan on for the last half hour, absolutely fine by me. I just don't think Anthony Ralston can start this game just after the weekend's performance. We know what he, as you quite rightly said, we know what he brings to the side. I just think that it's the end of a natural cycle for a lot of these players, and unfortunately they're all happening at the same time. There's about 5 or 6 that you could put in that camp. There's players going through the motions clearly, and when you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 of these players in the same boat mentally, and I don't want to talk about anybody mentally in that, but just from the outside looking in at players that have been there for a number of years, if they're all in that same boat, then it's very difficult to stay motivated if you're maybe subconsciously one foot out of the door. Not that I'm saying that he wants to leave or anything like that, but just with the way that things are going just now at Celtic, for me, just long story short, if Alistair Johnson is fit, he starts the game for me, plays 60 minutes, then comes off in preparation for Hearts. But if he's not fully fit, don't risk him.
George Campbell saying, I'm concerned if we don't sack Brendan. P.S. John, I know you won't read anything against Brendan Rodgers. George, I don't know what idea you've got about me, but I certainly wouldn't not put across your point of view just because it's not my point of view. In actual fact, I do think pressure is rising on Brendan Rodgers as well. We've got an hour-long video coming up this evening that I did with Hamish regarding the Brendan Rodgers situation and what his future looks like. I don't want to give that whole video away, but effectively, regardless of how you look at the various scenarios that play out at Celtic over the next 8 months or so, Celtic are rapidly heading towards a future without Brendan Rodgers. Whether he goes mid-season or he goes at the end of the season, I don't think Celtic's future is with Brendan Rodgers. I think that's become pretty clear, actually, because Celtic haven't offered him a new contract, and he is saying that he would stay in certain circumstances, but those circumstances don't appear to be evident. So I don't think Brendan Rodgers particularly has a future at Celtic, and that makes all of this a little bit more concerning, because at what point do you say, well, as a reason motivation is hard to find within this Celtic group is because they know this isn't going to be their boss this time next year? Is there an element of that to everything? You can read too much into these situations sometimes, and you have to trust the professionalism of the squad that they don't let distractions like that happen. But I don't think it's a slight on their moral character if motivation has naturally dipped over the last few months because of the situation around the club, the situation with Brendan Rodgers, the situation with the lack of freshness in the squad. That's not a moral failing of these players. It's just a natural byproduct of that competition not coming into the squad, their future's been uncertain. Brendan Rodgers' future's been uncertain. Some of these players already wanting away, such as Maeda, Yang. There's, you could look at some of the others in the team who aren't performing and consider they might want away too. So I'm seeing a lot of this comment around Brendan Rodgers at the moment, Ryan, regarding his future. How bad does it need to get before Celtic say cheerio? Again, historically, Celtic have been very slow to react to these situations. Neil Lennon in the 2020-21 season, Tony Mowbray to an extent limped on a little bit longer than a lot of Celtic fans would have wanted. We know that who makes this call is Dermot Desmond. The one and only man who makes the call on whether a manager stays or goes or comes to the club. So there are various scenarios that can play out over the next few weeks where the pressure feels like it would be too great for Brendan Rodgers, but then it comes down to what does Celtic have the stomach to do, and I think it will be a lot longer than what some fans are feeling in their stomach at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that would be the case if there was to be a change. And the fact is, you're talking about Dermot Desmond having all the power. Dermot Desmond's the reason why Brendan Rodgers is back at Celtic. It's not because of Peter Lawwell or Michael Nicholson. It's because Dermot Desmond reached out, and he was certainly a big fan in his first spell, and then he brought him back for the second spell as well. So I don't know how bad it would need to get to. You've also got the semi-final coming up against Rangers. Rangers have now got a new manager in the door. would it take a defeat to a new manager and a new Rangers, not a new Rangers side, but a new style of Rangers for push to come to shove in that? I'm not sure. Hearts at the weekend, if that was a damaging result, would that prompt change? Would that mean that changes would happen off the back of that game? I'm really not sure, because we've never been in this situation before at this level with Brendan Rodgers. It's a weird one. I know there's been troubling times before, both in the third season of his opening spell, or his first spell at Celtic, and then in his first season back, going that after that Hearts game, dropping points to Kilmarnock, Motherwell, etc. We've never, but I don't feel as if the angers, or not the anger, but the mood has ever been like this before, which is really concerning to me. And the results haven't been as bad as some of those moments, but it's just the general feeling of the club and the way that the club's playing at the moment on the park that I just feel it's we're at a really stressful situation, or a really dodgy situation that the club need to get themselves out of. Otherwise, there will be problems.
My response to that would be that Dermot Desmond doesn't care about the mood. He doesn't care about what fans think about Celtic or how they feel about Celtic. He won't take that into consideration at all. If Brendan Rodgers does leave Celtic mid-season, it will be because Dermot Desmond has had enough, and only Dermot Desmond. And that is the fact of the situation. That is how the managerial position functions at Celtic. And listen, we're talking about a Celtic board who think they've been successful because they've qualified for Europe for 19 of the last 20 seasons, conveniently sidestepping the fact that they've failed in 7 of the last 9 Champions League qualifying attempts, and qualifying for Europe in those years has been in the Europa League. So they are a board who like to spin certain facts in their favour and spin records. So what fans are feeling right now is a team that's regressed consistently over the last year, I would suggest, on and off the pitch. I think Celtic will look at it as, well, Brendan Rodgers still delivered success last year, and he started this season poorly, and he will deserve time to turn it around until it is no longer possible to turn around. That is the way that Celtic have functioned in the past with the managerial position. They've only ever really changed it when it's become apparent that this can't be turned around in any capacity at all. Now, fans will come to that determination quicker because obviously the nature of being a supporter is you are more reactive to on-field events and you feel it within you much more at times. Hazel Finn asking, I read recently Brendan Rodgers has a year's further option on his contract. Is that true? No, I don't think that is, Hazel. It's a straight 3-year contract. He signed it. He said, I'm staying for the 3 years if I'm wanted. And so it comes to the situation where people are speculating whether Brendan Rodgers would resign. No, I don't think Brendan Rodgers would ever resign. I think he said, I'm here for the 3 years for as long as I'm wanted. So that seems to be the natural stopping point at the moment. And it's not nice to be talking in these terms. We know how much success Brendan Rodgers has delivered in the past, and all of us hope that at some point he manages to start to turn this around. But I don't think you can argue that there's a body of evidence built in that he hasn't been able to so far this season, so why would he suddenly be able to now? Because as we've discussed, and has wider supporters discussed for a long time, Celtic haven't won a big game for a long time now, and they haven't won a big game of consequence for quite a while. You have to really go back to the Leipzig game, for me, as the last really massive game that Celtic delivered on the big stage. So it's worrying times because of that. It's not just about the start of the season. This has been months in the making.
Yeah, like Leipzig, to an extent, young boys, even though it was our own goal that decided that game. Maybe Rangers in the Premier Sports Cup final, but even then, that was a turgid affair, and they didn't play well on the day. They got lucky with a penalty shootout. But the body of evidence is mounting up, and Celtic just aren't delivering when the going gets tough and when the pressure is on, which is something that's been synonymous with Celtic under Brendan Rodgers. Brendan Rodgers has been used to winning pressure games. That's the reason why people were so excited to have him back, why they were so happy with him after maybe not happy. There's always been people that have kind of doubted his credentials in the second spell, but he has delivered more often than not in games, and that's the reason why he's won loads of trophies in both spells as Celtic manager. But unfortunately, since the turn of the year, since the start of 2025, he the results that Celtic have been managing haven't been of the same level. You go into pressure games, you look at the recent record against Rangers, you look at the Scottish Cup final against Aberdeen as well, which went to a penalty shootout, even the Kairat game. This is a mountain body of evidence against this side as a whole, and unfortunately against the manager, that he's not coming up with big results when big results are needed. And that can be down to a number of things. It can be down to the lack of investment, but really, once those players cross that white line, it's on them and it's on the manager to get a result. And unfortunately, and more often than not with these pressure-filled games, that's not been happening of late, which is a problem.
Yeah, no, it is a problem. And again, the problem is if Brendan Rodgers does leave mid-season, which I still think is a fairly remote possibility, not because I don't think change is necessary at Celtic and wouldn't be necessary if results continue to deteriorate. It just because I know the way you get a sense of how Celtic function and think about these situations, and they're just so slow to react to anything that I can't see them reacting pretty proactively with the manager either. That's just my frank assessment of the situation. But even if you did change, who's coming in to affect quality change in the manner that they require? Again, it comes back to this idea, if Brendan Rodgers goes, it again just leaves the board further open to just criticism in a way that they have struggled to handle as well. And they haven't handled criticism themselves well this year. We've seen that with the statement that was released shortly after the transfer window that exacerbated an already fraught situation and has effectively prompted the protests that we're now seeing from the Celtic collective and other Celtic fans. So Celtic board would be open to criticism that they can't handle, and I don't really have much confidence that they'd be able to respond well in that situation. There's not a defined sporting director with a playing budget and a football budget that can enact a football and strategy above a head coach, for example, as we're seeing at other clubs. It would need to be Celtic's best hope of movement forward is finding another cult of personality manager, unfortunately. Like, in the short term, that would be the best thing for Celtic. Do I think that's the best thing in the long term? No, I don't. I think Celtic need to figure out what kind of structure, what kind of football department structure they want, and how a head coach or a manager fits into that. That is suitable for the modern age. But I guess what I'm getting at, Ryan, is my worry is if Brendan Rodgers did leave mid-season, I don't know if Celtic would be any better off. You know, again, it comes to the situation as how unstable can it become if you start making radical changes. And that's a real concern. So you start to look at next year. Obviously, the summer's an opportunity, but then again, Ryan, do you trust the Celtic board to have their ducks in a row with regard to a potential Rodgers exit at the end of the season, and have this structure in place and have a new football and department philosophy going forward that really enhances the strengths of a quality head coach that can get the best out of Celtic tactically and in terms of motivation?
I just don't think they have the infrastructure, and that's quite concerning for me because they've tried numerous ways to make new roles within the squad, but we can only see from the outside. Unfortunately, we don't get the full. Well, first of all, we don't really get told what's happening. We don't get that person, that designated person, who right now is Paul Tisdale, who has quite an overarching view on things, and he's in different sectors. But we've never had an interview. We've never had a piece to camera or whatever of what he's bringing to the table. And we've heard this. We never had that with the predecessor either, with Mark Lawwell. I know that his role was a little bit different, but we never had that. All we had was quotes from Ange Postecoglou. I actually remember the statement that came out about 2-3 years ago. It had Ange Postecoglou's face on it. It didn't even have Mark Lawwell's face on it. It was like, Ange approves this, therefore it's totally fine. Just go with it. To be fair, that wasn't the case with Paul Tisdale, but I just don't believe that Celtic have the infrastructure to properly recruit. Well, I believe that they can properly recruit, but in terms of Brendan Rodgers leaving and somebody else coming in, I don't think it's as ideal as what I would want it to be. And there was a real opportunity a few years back to properly implement that and get different roles for different sectors. I just don't think they've got that at the moment, and that is concerning. And I think they have tried ways in which to designate certain areas to certain people, but I don't think it's good enough. And I think you would feel the ripple effects if somebody like Brendan Rodgers was to leave the club. I think the club have just got to modernise, but do they have the appetite to modernise in that way? I don't know if it'll be more shrug of the shoulders from Michael Nicholson.
Bobby asking, why don't the media ask where Dermot Desmond is during all of this? And listen, that's a fair point. I don't know if that's directed at us or the wider media or whoever. Dermot Desmond's role, I think, should be under more scrutiny. And in fact, in fairness to us personally, our outlet, we had an hour-long video on, I think it was the 11th of August, so that's more than 2 months ago now, laying out how Dermot Desmond functions as a club and how recruitment might be defined by this overall strategy that he sets. I did an hour-long video with Hamish going through interviews that Dermot Desmond has given in the past regarding Celtic and his outlook on Celtic and why that informs us about what's going on at Celtic now. I'm going to post the link in the chat just in case anyone's not seen that, because, as I say, I do think Dermot Desmond's role needs to be under scrutiny. Now, people may be going, John, what are you talking about? Dermot Desmond's not involved on a day-to-day basis. For me, it's not about him being involved on a day-to-day basis. He isn't involved on a day-to-day basis. Michael Nicholson is the day-to-day operator who runs Celtic. Regardless of what you think of Peter Lawwell, etc., it's Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay that do the majority of the day-to-day work at Celtic in terms of running the business. But Dermot Desmond is part of the group that sets the overall strategy, and effectively it all comes down from the way he likes to think and the way he wants Celtic to function as a club that always wipes its nose, if you will, in regard to the income coming into the club and going out of the club. In recent years, Celtic haven't even done that. You know, they've managed to amass this pile of money, and then they've spent the last 2 years justifying why they've amassed this pile of money when but Dermot Desmond's own words in the past has never alluded to the fact that they would hoard any sort of massive bank balance at all. They've always been a club that he sees that has spent as much as it brings in, but Celtic haven't been managed to do that in recent years, I think, because they don't have the expertise at the club to manage finances on that level in a footballing context in competition with clubs around Europe. That's my thinking. But I think it's true that Dermot Desmond's role in all of this has to be scrutinised more, and I do agree with that. So hopefully you go back and watch that video. As I say, we put this out 2 months ago. It was well before the transfer window shut. It wasn't reactive to anything that has gone on at Celtic since. It was more laying out why Celtic function in the way they do and who's responsible for it. And in my opinion, the overall strategy is set by Dermot Desmond's vision for Celtic. And some people would say, Ryan, Dermot Desmond's involvement brings stability to the club, and he's been a stable force at Celtic over the last 2 decades, and Celtic haven't ran into trouble because of him. That's true to an extent, and I accept that stability argument, but ultimately, if we want Celtic to progress, we need to start having more modern structures that aren't built around the strategy of one man who, with all due respect, isn't a football expert and isn't someone who has that inherent footballing knowledge that an expert might have who has had decades working day to day within the game.
Yeah, when you talk about stability, that's all well and good from where Celtic came from, and just harking back to the 90s and bringing stability, Fergus McCann, and then Dermot Desmond bought the remainder of those shares. But I don't think stability is what Celtic need anymore, because I think that's a given where they are due to the way that they've been run. Now it's all about Celtic needing to push on, improve, thrive, actually spend the money that's required to modernise the club, not just on the park, but off the park as well. We always talk about Celtic Park and the need for modernisation, and I would completely agree with that. I feel like this current leadership and the current shareholders, the top shareholders, it's all become quite stale, and we need something different. We're talking about the same issues year on year. The only problem I've got is that there doesn't seem to be any chance or movement in that regard at all. It just seems like it's the same story every single year. I just feel as if something's got to give, and there's got to be a change made, just to give the club some life, give the club some excitement, just a different way of operating things. I think that Celtic have got so much potential. They should be a great spot for players to come, for managers to come as well. But at the moment, I just feel as if we're in a really stale place with the club going back and forth with managers. I just want to see something different, to be honest. I want to see a new movie, because it feels as if we're playing repeats over and over and over again. I just want a wee bit more excitement when it comes to Celtic, and I think that comes down to the fact that it doesn't help that Celtic aren't playing well, and in that case it becomes a bit of a chore watching the team at the moment. But I do want to see changes. I want to see the club pushing forward. Unfortunately, I just feel as if they don't the people in charge at the moment don't share those same ambitions that the supporters do and the people covering the club do.
Joe Rogan Josh saying, funny name, I'm not sure if I fancy that dish from the local takeaway. Joe Rogan Josh saying, Dundee put two past us playing basic defended, deep counter-attacking tactics. He needs to shore up the defence. If we are struggling for goals, an extra centre-back or an extra midfielder in the park would help. So my big concern is that the Celtic's problem this season has been chance creation. Chance creation has fallen off a cliff and fallen to historic lows. Celtic's goal scoring this season is well behind the curve, especially off the back of a season that saw Celtic's highest goal scoring total in all competitions for 54 years. It's quite alarming, the drop-off in Celtic's chance creation and goals this season. Alarming, very alarming. But my big concern now is that today, Dundee game aside, and elements of the Braga match, but Celtic's defensive unit have worked effectively enough, or at least at a level that we saw from last year and in years past. Celtic's defensive performance hasn't really dropped off a cliff yet. My concern is if the defensive performance of Celtic trends in the same direction as the attacking performance in Celtic, then suddenly a situation that is frustrating and annoying and not nice to see and ugly wins and ugly draws, etc., turns into a situation where Celtic are consistently losing rather than consistently winning. And that is a situation that we'll all need to be very wary of over the next few matches against teams we know that can do us damage in high pressure matches. And that's where we all start to take a big intake of breath when you're playing Sturm Graz, a team who are known for their kind of attacking nous, and they've been scoring a lot of goals this season, against Hearts, who we know will just be so up for that game on Sunday to an almost ridiculous degree, against Midtjylland away in a few weeks as well, and against Rangers at Hampden too. Like, these are teams that can cause us problems if they perform on to their best on the day as well. So my concern is, where does the defence trend from here, Ryan? And how worried do we need to be about that? There were really bad warning signs against Dundee on Sunday because the defensive performance that day was really bad, and if it continues to be that bad, then Celtic are in a much bigger hole than all of us care to admit at the moment.
My problem is we saw this 5 years ago, because Celtic were scoring goals 5 years ago in 2020, and then the defensive issues started happening. Once the defensive issues, that's your bedrock. It's the most. It's one of the most important areas of your team, being able to keep the ball out of the back of the net. But once you start shipping goals, 2-3 goals here and there, it becomes an even bigger task for the attack to really deliver, and it puts even more pressure on them to deliver. And I hate going back to that season, but the similarities are getting more and more. You know, I'm not just saying it for the sake of it. Oh, that was the last time Celtic had a bad season. I can personally see the similarities between that one and this one, or maybe the upcoming similarities, because maybe they haven't quite hit yet on a consistent basis negatively. But we can. I think we're all. You named all those games: Sturm Graz, Hearts, Rangers in the semi-final. I'm quite concerned about these games, to be honest. I'm quite concerned at what Celtic turns up, because unfortunately at the moment I don't know what Celtic are turning up. And then again, more often than not, the adverse Celtic's turning up, which any team will fancy their chances against at the moment. And because of what happened on Sunday against a team like Dundee, and fair play to them, they deserved their 3 points, but they've not been a good team this season. The level's going to get higher. The teams that Celtic are playing are better than Dundee. So naturally, you've got to see that improvement from Celtic, but you will see the improvement on the pitch from those teams that Celtic are playing against. So Celtic have got to up their levels to keep pace with these teams that they're going to come up against, who will be up for the challenge of Celtic. They'll sense an opportunity to get a result off of Celtic here. So it's a concerning situation for me. I want things to change, but we were speaking about it on Monday. It could get worse before it gets better, and that's a real concern for me.
Yeah, Ozzy making that point. Was it Tony or John who said it's going to get worse before we get better? Probably both of us, to be honest, Ozzy. I certainly did say that. I mean, this is a concern for everyone. Hamish was winding me up at the weekend because he remembers the 2020-21 season when obviously I was doing videos with Hamish, and that was one of the phrases I used at one point, and I haven't used that phrase since then about Celtic since that season. So that's where we are.
Sound the klaxon.
Again, I generally see myself as a Celtic optimist. That's the absurdity of having to talk so negatively about Celtic at the moment. I've been fairly optimistic about various aspects of Celtic over the last few years. Obviously not really with regard to the board and their strategy. But in terms of Brendan Rodgers, obviously I was massively excited about the Angie, etc. But when you see the warning signs right in front of your face, you have to call them out, and that's what I'm seeing at the moment. I'm seeing warning signs akin to the season that until this point has been a season that nobody has wanted to remember or think about. That's what I'm seeing at the moment. And I'm not saying Celtic are going to have a disastrous season to that level, because I think there's certain dynamics around the season that make it a totally different environment. First and foremost, the presence of fans at the stadium, no massive distractions with trips to Dubai and all that kind of nonsense that went on around that was a factor in that season. It can't be denied. I'm talking about on the pitch, though. The things I'm seeing on the pitch are really worrying. And actually, if you look man for man at that team, there's a lot of talent in that team that isn't in this team. And that's another worry. That's not good.
I'm just glad I'm glad I'm not the only one that thinks that, and I see people in the comments, so it makes me think I'm not going crazy, to be honest, which is great to see. I'm glad I'm not the only one that feels like that. And that's what this is all about. Is well, right, because I think opinions.
There's been at times over the last couple of years where people have said that, and I've always felt that's a bit off base, saying that this is nowhere near the COVID season. This is nowhere near that. But this is. Like, we're in a situation where this does now feel like that. And so the people who have been saying that over the last couple of years now see how bad it can get in terms of Celtic performance. And I live in eternal hope that Celtic find something within themselves, but it's not looking good at the moment. So what's your gut feeling on Brendan Rodgers then? Just to close off the show, Ryan, your gut feeling on what he's going to say today. For me, I think he's just going to use phrases and answers that he's already used multiple times this season. I can't really see anything new or fresh from Brendan Rodgers today that gives us any indication of any major changes coming to the Celtic team. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think it'll be stock answers, to be honest. I don't think he'll be looking to make any fancy quips to the media after the sort of furore of his Honda Civic comments on Sunday. I think he'll be keeping it measured.
Do you think he'll have something to say about the reaction to that Honda?
If he's asked about it.
Because sometimes if he says something and sometimes if he feels like it's been made too much of, he's been taken slightly out of context. So I'm not saying anyone has done that, but sometimes when he feels that has happened, sometimes he does come out and show a bit of fire. Do you foresee that today? I
remember he did that after the Motherwell game where he made a couple of choice comments about one of the, or just a quip to one of the reporters at Fir Park that day. I remember he touched upon it 3-4 days later. I think if he's asked about it, he will talk about it, because I think he's quite open. He's not that cagey with the media. He still likes to talk and is open about things, and to the best of his abilities, he'll try and answer any question that's put forward to him. That's to his credit. He is good. He's far better than his predecessor at doing that. That's one thing that I can definitely say. He's better at answering certain questions when compared to his predecessor. But if he's asked, I think he will respond to it. But that's the thing. Will he be asked that question? Because I'm not sure. It remains to be seen what happens at the press conference. But if he is asked, then I'm sure that he'll answer it, and he'll give a sort of explanation as to why he chose those words. I just feel like when you were talking earlier about. You were talking earlier about the players and their motives, and naturally they can turn off. I don't think comments like that, whether it was aimed at them or the board or whoever, I don't think that can help the situation just where the players are currently. If a player wasn't willing to run through a brick wall for you the first time, saying things like that will not help them in their pursuit of getting that mentality back at Celtic. That's just my opinion on it, but I think if he gets given the opportunity to talk about it this afternoon, I'm sure he will. It'll be one to keep an eye out on.
Okay, we're going to have full coverage of the Brendan Rodgers press conference later on celticway.co.uk, and obviously it'll be doing the rounds anyway. It's a UEFA one, so I think more organisations have video, etc. We will try to source video at some point. We don't have access to these press conferences with what I'm saying, us personally. So we kind of have to rely on stuff like the Press Association or UEFA themselves, who we do have access with, to provide us video. But if we do get video, we'll also have it up on YouTube as well. Okay, guys, again, thanks very much for joining us live in the chat. Spirited debate, as always, spirited comments. I know this has been a very Brendan Rodgers focused discussion. Brendan Rodgers is not alone in the failures of this season to date so far. It goes wide. It's a wider Celtic problem. It goes right across the club, and that's what we're all feeling at the moment. But I think it's inarguable to say that the next few games are defining for how the wider support feels about Brendan Rodgers moving Celtic forward. Celtic are under a massive amount of pressure. I don't think Brendan Rodgers has arguably been under this. He's always under pressure. He always talks about pressure at Celtic. He's been in a hairy moment before in his first season back at the club. I think he's currently in a more difficult situation now than he was then. And we need to see what he's made of at this point. We need to see what he's made of, what this team is made of, and hopefully they have the answers for us, because if they don't, Celtic season will start to unravel quite quickly. Okay, Ryan, any final thoughts before we head off?
No, I think we've covered everything to do with Brendan Rodgers. Just hoping for a better result tomorrow night, but we'll wait and see on that regard. Okay,
thanks everyone. I'm heading off for a few days. I've got a few days annual leave, so I won't be on the channel until next week. So I'm missing the Sturm Graz game and the Hearts game. So I'll be back on Monday with whatever has unfolded over these two massive games. So hopefully I'm smiling that day, folks, and hopefully we're talking about Brendan Rodgers answering the critics rather than feeling like he's succumbing to overall pressure. But until then, I'll see you again next time on the Celtic Way.